Out. So yes, hello everyone. I'm delighted to be here virtually with you today. I'd like to point out that I'm currently not in Quebec City, but in Paris. I've decided to trade the cold and the snow for the comfort of rights and piles of garbage. I'm also talking to you from an Airbnb in Le Marais, which is rather cozy, but sometimes a bit noisy. So I just hope that I won't get interrupted by scooter bikes or the screams of rioters or those of the chef from the restaurant below. So let us begin, nevertheless. So my talk today, which is taken from an article to be published in the forthcoming volumes on Tomb Monuments, edited by Christian Stier and Paul Cochrane, brings us to the region of Maine, France. It is there that in 1846, after having completed some of his clerical duties as vérificateur de l'enregistrement in the small town of Saint-Denis-d'Arc, Eugène Huchet traveled a short distance northeast to assess a few broken statues lying in the derelict remains of the Abbey of Étival, near Chemérey-en-Charny in the Sarthe region. Wearing the hats of both local scholar and member of various learned societies, Huchet quickly recognized the fragments to be the recumbent effigies that once belonged to 4 members of the Beaumont family, which held the title of Viscount of Maine. In an effort to save them from becoming construction rubble, Huchet had the statues moved to the Musée d'Archéologie et d'Histoire du Maine in Le Mans, where they remain to this day. Given the absence of inscriptions on the statues, the exact identity of those they depict, as well as their creation date, have so far been conjectural, with focus mostly put on stylistic considerations and the use of secondary sources. The general opinion is that the tombs date broadly to the 13th century. Unsatisfied with such vagueness, I took it upon myself to revisit the evidence by taking further into account the historical context in which the Beaumont tombs came into being. As Viscounts of Maine, the Beaumonts had to navigate through the turbulent waters of political turmoil, while the county found itself in the midst of the ongoing feud between the Plantagenets and the Capetians. I believe that such circumstances could shed new light on the 4 monuments. Rather than viewing them strictly as examples of Gothic sculpture, my approach is therefore to understand the Beaumont tombs as a testimony in stone to the family identity, as it defined itself through allegiances and alliances during troubled times. Although there are no sources documenting their origins, the Beaumonts are said to come from a high lineage going back to the Carolingian period, and perhaps even branching off from the Counts of Maine themselves. Charters naming Viscount of Maine a certain Ralph of Beaumont confirmed the family's influence in the region at the end of the 10th century. Through matrimonial alliances, the descendants of Ralph, who continued to hold the title of Viscount of Beaumont, consolidated the family's dominion in the county and inevitably brought its members into open conflict with other families, and especially with the King of England. For like most of the lands of Anjou, Maine, and Touraine, the lordship of Beaumont was located between first Norman, then Plantagenet territories, and the Capetian Kingdom of France. This uneasy position regularly forced the Beaumont family to negotiate their allegiance to one crown or the other in the ongoing conflicts between the kings of England and France. After finally rallying itself to the Capetians during the reign of King John, like so many other families in the region, the Beaumont family ultimately saw its male lineage end and its titles passed through marriage to the powerful Brienne family at the beginning of the 14th century. As for the relationship between the Beaumonts and the Abbey of Étival, it began in 1109, when Ralph V offered a portion of the family land near the castle of Sainte-Suzanne to Allaume, a disciple of Robert d'Arbrissel, so that he could establish a female Benedictine community. Ralph V's sister, Godhild, who until then had been a nun at the Abbey of Ronceret in Angers, became its first abbess. Given the Beaumont status as founders of the monastery, Étival became the natural burial place for the family, who came to dispose of its own funerary chapel inside the southern transept of the church. The chapel suffered important damage during an accidental fire in 1511 and was still in a state of ruin when the French antiquarian François Roger de Guenièvre visited the abbey with his draftsman Louis Boudon at the end of the 17th century. Dated 1695, Boudon's cavalier view of the abbey shows that the roof of the Chapelle des Vicomtes still awaited reconstruction almost 2 centuries after the blaze. While it is unknown if this situation of neglect lasted until the French Revolution, it is clear, however, that after 1792, the chapel was destroyed along with the rest of the abbey, except for the church's northern transept. It is in this lone vestige, which had previously served as a parish church for the town of Charny, that Huchet made his discovery in 1846. It appears that, in an effort to salvage them, someone had placed the monuments under the floor of what had served as a sacristy between the apse of the transept and the remaining wall of the church choir. The earliest accounts of the Beaumont tombs are the drawings made for Guenièvre during his visit to the abbey in 1695. In all, these depict 7 monuments, which, if we're to believe the captions, still stood in the Beaumont's funerary chapel, called Chapelle des Seigneurs or Chapelle des Fondateurs, despite its state of ruin. According to the chronology of their identification, the first tomb would belong to Ralph V. The founder of the abbey is shown wearing chainmail and a nose helmet with a rounded skull cap. He carries a sword and a shield bearing the arms of Beaumont, which are of chevronny gold and gules. 2 incense-bearing angels appear on each side of his head, while a third angel lies topsy-turvy beneath his feet. Guenièvre assigns the second tomb to Richard I, identified as the son of Ralph V. With his helmless head on a pillow and his feet resting on a sculpted console, the deceased joins his hand in prayer while carrying a shield with the Beaumont coat of arms. 6 small figures surround him, of which 4 are clearly incense-bearing angels. The damage sustained by the other 2, placed at the feet of the effigy, makes their identification impossible, but it is most likely that they too were angels. The third tomb would be that of Ralph VI, captioned as the second son of Ralph V. It depicts the deceased as a knight dressed in full chainmail and holding a long shield displaying the family coat of arms. His head lies on a pillow held by 2 figures, likely angels, while his feet rest on the back of a lion. The lady on the 4th tomb would be Agnes of Beaumont, with whom the male bloodline of the family came to an end at the beginning of the 14th century. Eyes closed and hands joined in prayer, she is wearing a robe, a mantle, and a wimple. 2 angels hold the pillow under her head while a dog crouches at her feet. The chest supporting the recumbent effigy displays on its front side 3 mourning figures standing beneath Gothic arches. More of them were doubtless present on the other sides. The 5th tomb would belong to Agnes's husband, Louis of Brienne, identified as Louis of Beaumont. Louis appears as a bareheaded knight standing on a lion and carrying a shield with the Brienne coat of arms of Azure Semi of Fleur de Lis or a lion rampant of the same. Like his wife, the deceased lies in prayer with his head on a pillow framed by 2 angels. The front side of the chest shows two sculpted mourners underneath Gothic arches. Ascribed to the son of Agnes and Louis, Jean of Brienne, identified here as Jean of Beaumont, the sixth tomb is almost identical to the previous one. The only differences are the ailettes on the shoulders of the effigy charged with the Brienne arms, and the presence of a third mourning figure on the tomb's chest. The final tomb drawn for Guénière is that of a lady who remains anonymous. Rather than provide an overhead view of the monument like the previous ones, the drawing presents the tomb from its left side. Placed in a niche or a recess, the recumbent effigy resembles that of Agnes. Both share the same clothes, are in a state of prayer, and have their heads placed on a cushion between two angels. The only differences here are the presence of a second dog at the feet and that of three figures standing behind the head of the deceased. These depict a prelate flanked by what appears to be two female mourners. It is by comparing their remains with the Guénière drawings that Huchet was able to identify the four statues brought back from the ruins of Étival. Despite the damage they sustained, he concluded that they were of Ralph V, Ralph VI, Agnes of Beaumont, and Jean of Brienne. The attribution is convincing and generally accepted to this day. However, I believe that there is a possible mistake regarding the monument of Agnes of Beaumont. Huchet seemed to overlook the Guénière drawing of the anonymous woman's tomb, probably because the original drawing was kept at the Bodleian Library and its copy from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France was placed in a volume different from the one combining the other drawings from Étival. As a result, he associated the female statue to the only other Guénière drawing depicting a woman's effigy, that of Agnes of Beaumont. Yet careful examination of the drawing reveals a discrepancy between both. The statue appears to be standing on the back of two dogs, while on the drawing of Agnes's tomb, there is but one. Knowing that the draftsman Boudin was prone to make mistakes, the difference would not be that important, were it not for the fact that there seems to be two dogs at the feet of the anonymous woman. Although the lateral view of the tomb makes it a bit more difficult to identify the animals, the presence of two beasts hints at the possibility that the female statue recovered from Étival was actually that of the anonymous woman. Unfortunately, the question of her identity remains unresolved, as no one ever paid attention to the tomb after Huchet's oversight of its drawing. If Huchet's attribution remained authoritative, his dating of the statues has proven to be controversial. The problem is that Huchet believed that the dates of the Beaumont tombs were approximately the same as the year of death of the deceased. In his seminal study of the Viscounts of Maine, published in 1914, Abbot Alphonse Ongot rose against this notion by suggesting that all the Beaumont tombs dated, in fact, from the end of the 13th century, when he believed the construction of the family chapel took place. Although no one really followed up on Angot's controversial proposal, the idea that a certain period of time may exist between the death of an individual and the creation of his or her tomb has brought many to reconsider, at the very least, the date of Ralph V's monument. Indeed, of all the four statues, the one attributed to the founder of Étival has been the main object of contention. While there is no real good reason to recuse its attribution, the moment of its creation has always proved quite problematic. For Huchet, the tomb had to date from around the time of Ralph V's death. Although the Guénière drawing suggests that the foundation of Étival was in 1210, Huchet correctly placed the event in 1109 and estimated the founder's death somewhere between 1120 and 1125. By so adding over a century to the monument, Huchet could then enthusiastically declare it one, and I quote, one of the most ancient specimens of French civil statuary. Now, it is true that compared to that of the three other surviving tombs, the quality of the sculpture appears rather rudimentary. Close inspection of the monument confirms this impression by revealing that the sculpting of the limestone took at the most only 3 tools, 1 point and 2 scissors, and did not seem to follow any pre-established pattern or guideline. However, the size of the shield and that of the sword's hilt do not correspond to the type of armament that would be in use in the early 12th century. According to Alfred Mussy, the military details of the effigy rather point to the end of the 12th century, a period also suggested by Jean-Bernard de Vèvre, who consequently attributed the patronage of the tomb to Ralph V's grandson, Richard I, who died in 1194. Oddly enough, given that the subject of her study was the armored gisant, Judith Hurtig did not rely on the military details of the effigy to date Ralph V's tomb, but focused instead on the angels. Having misread the caption of the Guignard drawing and believing that Ralph had founded not the abbey, but the Beaumont Chapel in 1210, she looked to a series of tombs from the 1220s, formerly in the Abbey of Sainte Marie of Josaphat, to suggest a date before circa 1225. More recently, Julien Louis pushed the date of the monument even further by arguing that its iconographic details were typical of the second half of the 13th century, and that the archaic quality of its workmanship was probably intentional. Indeed, without going as far as Angot and placing its creation within a single program that encompassed all the other Beaumont monuments, Louis claimed that, given Ralph V's status as founder, his tomb deliberately looked ancient so that it could pass for a monument of the 1130s. Thus, while discarding Huchet's proposed date, the research so far has placed the creation of the tomb anywhere between the middle of the 12th and the end of the 13th century by relying essentially on style and iconography. Rather than struggle with visual clues that point to different moments spanning over 150 years, I propose to narrow down that time frame by focusing instead on the events that could have led to the monumental commemoration of the founder of Étival. In other words, to determine the when of the monument, I believe it necessary to also take into account the why and explore the political strategies pertaining to family identity. Aside from Huchet, there is a large consensus that Ralph V's tomb was the result of a commemorative enterprise undertook long after his death. As such, it counts as one of the many retrospective monuments raised in the 12th and 13th century to glorify the memory of an individual for the benefit of a group. In this case, the tomb of Ralph V was surely meant to celebrate both the Beaumont family and the Benedictine nuns of Étival, with which it kept tight relations ever since the monastery's foundation. Likely thought of as a family burial site from the start, the chapel in which stood the tomb may even have emphasized the monument's presence by housing it within a niche or en feu, like is so often the case for such monuments. Materially, the subtle inclination of the sculpture does indeed hint at this type of honorary display, as it would have allowed for a better view of the effigy. Now, an ideal moment to elaborate such a commemorative endeavor would have been around the time that the Abbey celebrated its 100th anniversary in 1209. Guignard's drawing of the monuments could suggest this possibility through its mention of the year 1210. As mentioned, Huchet bluntly discarded the caption as a mistake because he believed it was in reference to the year of the Abbey's foundation. Admittedly, the caption, which reads Il est de Raoul de Beaumont, fondateur l'an 1210, could be read in this manner. However, Guignard knew that the abbey was not founded in 1210. His cavalier view of Etival confirms this. The legend in the upper part of the drawing clearly indicates that the foundation of the abbey was in 1110, just a year off from the real date, but Guignard was probably using the old reckoning. Thus, it is entirely conceivable that by mentioning the year 1210, Guignard referred to the date of the tomb itself and not that of the abbey's foundation. Dating the tomb to around 1210 would therefore place its patronage during the lifetime of Ralph V's great-grandson, Ralph VI. Knowing from the Abbey charters that Ralph VI founded his own anniversary at Etival on its 100th Jubilee, it is more than reasonable to believe that he would have taken this opportunity to materialize the memory of his ancestor in the church he once founded. In addition to such conjecture, the details of the effigy supports this hypothesis. It is true that the armor points to the late 12th century. However, far from being irrelevant in 1210, its look would seem just dated enough to highlight the ancestral status of its bearer. Another argument in favor of dating the monument to around 1210 comes from the coat of arms displayed on the shield. According to Huchet, the first appearance of the Cheverny gold and gules of the Beaumont is on a seal from a charter dating from 1211. Because he was eager to make Ralph V's monument an ancient one, Huchet argued that the coat of arms identified by Guignard were obviously added to the tomb at a later date. Yet, there is no reason to dismiss the possibility that it was present from the start. Finally, the events to which the 1211 charter refers to provide a political context in which the creation of Ralph V's monument would make perfect sense. Indeed, the charter states that Ralph VI joined the French king Philip Augustus in his assault upon the castle at Chantaussé held by the Grand family. Now, this marks a change in allegiance for the Beaumonts. Historically, the family had leaned in favor of the crown of England. After resisting against William II, Ralph V imitated the other lords of the region and finally made peace with him in 1098. Under Plantagenet rule, the relationship between the English king and the Beaumonts grew stronger. In 1145, Ralph V's son, Rosslin, wed Constance, an illegitimate daughter of King Henry I. After 1176, Henry II gave Rosslin's son Richard I the castle and town of Bourg-le-Roi. The following kings continued to be close to the Beaumonts, with which they now shared a bloodline. It is certainly because of these blood ties that both Richard the Lionheart and King John had members of the Beaumont family, Ralph and William, promoted to the bishopric of Angers. However, as Philip Augustus' hold on the county of Maine slowly spread, things gradually fell out. Already wavering in 1202, Ralph VI's fealty to England ended the next year when he joined Count Robert of Sée and other lords of the area in their rebellion against John, an event that facilitated Philip Augustus' conquest of Anjou and Maine in 1204. Ultimately, Ralph VI officially pledged his allegiance to the French crown in 1210. A particular feature on the tomb of Ralph V possibly attests to this shift of loyalty. The angel at the feet of the knight's effigy is a rather unusual figure that bears witness to the early and experimental work of the monument. Depicted half-flanked and upside down, it is a rare, if not unique, angel to appear underfoot in medieval tomb sculpture. What is most interesting, however, is what he holds in his hands. Rather than carrying a censer like his two colleagues at the other end, the angel holds two fleurs-de-lis. Given their potential significance in the political context of the period, it is surprising that the symbols have excited very little comment. Huchet noted their presence, but simply labeled them as heraldic. Since he considered the tomb to date from the early 12th century, he dared not identify the fleur-de-lis with the French royal symbol it was to become only later with Philip Augustus. As for Hertig, she did not even acknowledge their heraldic quality, but only described them as scepters. The only one to see the fleur-de-lis as a likely reference to the Kingdom of France was Julien Louis. Their presence on Ralph V's tomb served to validate his dating of the monument to the second half of the 13th century, when the county of Maine was resolutely French. Yet, as Louis himself briefly conceded, the political understanding of the symbol could historically make sense at an earlier date. This could be after the death of Berengaria of Navarre in 1230, by which the county of Maine officially became part of the French royal domain, or earlier after Philip Augustus' conquest of the land in 1204. That year also bears witness to the first known heraldic use of the fleur-de-lis as an expression of identification to the French crown with the seal of Pierre II of Courtenay. Thus, in light of the political situation, the presence of the fleur-de-lis on Ralph V's tomb would be entirely compatible with a creation date around 1210. Not only would the monument then serve to commemorate the foundation of the Abbey of Étival on its jubilee, but it would also act as a visual and perennial testimony to the Beaumont's political realignment in favor of the French crown, a realignment that Ralph VI would make official in 1210 by pledging his allegiance to Philip Augustus. Furthermore, the tomb could even help to rewrite an aspect of the family's history. Indeed, by connecting the royal French symbol to Ralph V, the monument could imply that the latter had himself been an ally of the Kingdom of France, and that, in effect, his great-grandson simply renewed this alliance. Of course, in the early decades of the 13th century, such political strategy could prove to be a gamble. After conquering Normandy in 1204, Philip Augustus had made the widow of Richard the Lionheart, Berengaria of Navarre, Countess of Maine, a title she would hold until her death in 1230, after which the county officially became part of the French royal domain. The political situation in Maine during Berengaria's rule was therefore one of tension, with many challenging her authority, which in effect did not extend far beyond the city walls of Le Mans. Most importantly, King John, who was reluctant to relinquish her dowry, included her in his plans to take back the county by promising to recognize her rights over Le Mans and parts of the area. Perhaps this is why the presence of the fleur-de-lis on Ralph V's tomb is not too ostentatious, like it would later become on the tomb of Ralph VI's brother, William of Beaumont. Although named bishop by the King of England in 1202 or 1203, William died in 1240, when the county of Maine was part of the Kingdom of France for a good decade. Consequently, his funeral monument, formerly in the Cathedral of Angers, made his allegiance to the French crown unambiguous by flaunting a dense fleur-de-lis diapered pattern on its brass slab. Now, admitting that Ralph VI commissioned his great-grandfather's tomb around the year 1210 is not without consequences for our understanding of the other monuments of the Beaumont family, and especially the one attributed by Guignard to Richard I. Because it is lost, the monument attracted far less attention than the four surviving ones. Yet, the question of its attribution is debatable. To begin with, Guignard identified Richard I as Fils de Raoul, when, as Huchet noted, he was actually his grandson. I believe here that Guignard confused Richard I with, here, I had this to show you. All right. I believe that Guignard confused Richard I with Richard II, who indeed was the son of Ralph, but of Ralph VI. Several observations support this hypothesis. First, there is no record of Richard I's burial in Étival. Although he did establish an anniversary there close to his death in 1194, his body could have been buried in another place. Given his close relations with the Crown of England, it is quite possible that Richard I preferred to join his parents, Rosalind and Constance, buried in the Plantagenet Abbey of Saint-Étienne, where he founded an anniversary for them around 1190. Of course, there is no certainty either that Richard II had his grave in Étival. However, that possibility becomes likely if one is to date the commission of Ralph V's tomb to around 1210. As I've mentioned, at that moment, the idea of transforming the Étival Chapel into a family necropolis was certainly present in the mind of Ralph VI. After his own burial there in 1237, it would therefore be expected that his son Richard II joined him upon his death, which occurred just 5 years later. The style and iconography of the tomb also support its attribution to Richard II. A simple comparison of the monument with those of his predecessor and successor makes this clear. The pillow under the effigy's head, the shape and position of the shield, and the length and opening of the knight's tunic are all elements that reveal that Richard I's tomb has more in common with Ralph VI than with Ralph V's retrospective monument. It also shares with the tomb of William of Beaumont from the 1240s the rather unusual type of console upon which stands the effigy. It is obviously tempting to use these observations to validate the attribution of the tomb to Richard II on the basis that he died only 5 years after his father. Doing so, however, would mean to conflate the date of death with the creation of the tomb, as Huchet did with his dating of the monuments. More importantly, the features of the tombs share with that of Ralph VI, the features the tomb shares with that of Ralph VI are uncharacteristic of those from the 1230s and 1240s. Indeed, according to Julien Louis, they are rather typical of the final third of the 13th century. So if we're to date both the tomb of Richard II and Ralph VI to the end of the 13th century, that would place their creation in a particular context. As mentioned, Richard II had no male heir of his own, and so the name and title of Viscount of Beaumont went directly to his sister Agnes, who in 1253 married Louis of Brienne. The Étival Chapel explicitly bore witness to this evolution of the family lineage by displaying on its eastern wall a stained glass window in which Agnes and Louis face each other in prayer, probably beneath an image of the Virgin that was lost in the chapel fire. Documented by this Guignard drawing, the panels show Agnes on the left, dressed in a bliot with the cheverny golden gules of her family arms, while on the right, Louis wears a surcoat bearing the golden lion of the Brienne. Turrets and fleurs-de-lis surround them to signify the couple's allegiance to the French crown, though the turrets may also refer to Louis's mother, Berengaria of Castile. Louis's coat of arms also attests to a personal attachment to the Capetian kings. Indeed, after his marriage with Agnes, he modified his father's arms by adding fleur-de-lis on its field of azure. It is this personalized version of the Brienne coat of arms that appeared in the window as well as on the shield of his effigy. Now, the depiction of the union inside the Viscount's chapel is rather significant, given the implication of the event. As mentioned, the marriage between Agnes and Louis marked the ultimate transfer of the title Viscount of Beaumont to the Brienne family. Given this context, the monuments commemorating Richard II and Ralph VI would necessarily contribute to the visual statement of a dynastic transition. Indeed, put in relation with the tomb of Ralph V, the two monuments would form a genealogical sequence of viscounts that bypasses the memory of those that were close to the Plantagenets, Rosslyn and Richard I. While the marriage of Agnes and Louis in 1253 would act as its terminus ante quem, I believe that the installment of the stained glass window and the tombs of Richard II and Ralph VI was actually done much later in 1285. Indeed, on that year, Agnes and Louis made substantial donations to the nuns of Étival. They also reiterated the different rights, privileges, and donations granted to the monastery by the previous Viscounts of Beaumont by singling out the names of Richard II and Ralph VI. More importantly, the couple produced a vidimus of the foundation charter of the abbey in presence of the nuns. In addition to Ralph V, the document explicitly names Richard II and Ralph VI as the Viscounts who added their seals to that of the founder. This emphasis on the immediate predecessors of Agnes and Louis, as they are called in the vidimus, could therefore have found its monumental expression in the tomb raised to their memory. With the passing of Louis of Brienne, shortly after these solemn events, his tomb would have joined those of Richard II and Ralph VI to further display the transfer of the Viscount of Beaumont title to the Brienne family. Once again, the heraldry of the monuments would have played a key role in this. Beneath the stained glass window in which the two merged, the Brienne coat of arms would replace that of the Beaumonts on the shield of the recumbent effigy, thus enacting the transition between the two dynasties. The program would then conclude with the tomb of Agnes of Beaumont and her son, Jean of Brienne, who both died in 1306. With Agnes being irrevocably the last of her line, Jean's effigy proudly sports his father's coat of arms on his shield and on his ailette, confirming through heraldry the passage from one dynasty to another. A passage that completes the political message of the monumental enterprise by solemnizing the long-lasting ties between the Beaumonts and the Kingdom of France on both an intimate and an official level. Thus, from Ralph V to that of Jean of Brienne, the Beaumont tombs of Étival Abbey outline the evolution of the family's history over 2 centuries. Although it appears linear, the development presented by the monuments is not entirely continuous, but rather reflects the diverse strategies of selection, affirmation, and adaptation by which the main dynasty meant to perpetuate its authority and power during a period of political turmoil. Brought to light by an overdue reassessment of the monument's creation dates, these strategies helped carve in stone the new political allegiance of the Beaumonts in the wake of Philip Augustus' conquest of the county of Maine. Best encapsulating the process is perhaps how the commemorative program used the fleur-de-lis. From its discrete location on the retrospective monument of Ralph V to its bold display on the tomb of Jean of Brienne, the French royal symbol weaves gradually the narrative of the Beaumont identity over time. In conclusion, or rather as an epilogue, one must point out that the family identity forged by the Beaumont monuments is not only political. In addition to their intricate heraldic message, these share a common visual and material language that is quite different from the enameled tombs and the slabs that were common to the region. Indeed, by favoring stone effigies that are carefully depicted wearing modern armor, the Beaumont monuments have a specific style. Although not unique, that style acts as a sort of signature, one that would still serve for the tomb of Louis of Beaumont, Jean of Brienne's great-grandson, after his death at the Battle of Cocherel in 1364. While the tomb stood in the charter house of Le Parc, also a Beaumont foundation, it held the same characteristics as those of the Étival necropolis, and like them, helped consolidate and perpetuate the family identity. Thank you.